Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Herb, and today I would like to talk about MVC and Spring Boot and how to initialize your project. Okay, so what is MVC? Now, MVC is a design pattern that allows a developer to separate their project into a more modular way. So it can be separated into three parts, right? You have your models, your view, and your controller, right? So your model is essentially um, basically what it sounds like, a model of the real world. So it could be a user, it could be a product, it could be anything that can be represented as an object, or it could be anything that is something that's in the real world, right? So that's your model. Your view. Your view is essentially any front end technology that you're using. It could be HTML, it could be React, it could be Flutter. So your view is essentially your front end technology, right? And your controller. This is the main part of your application. Your controller essentially deals with the traffic, or deals with the logic. It deals with the logic mainly. It deals with the logic of your application. And so what that means is it handles based on based on UR or endpoints, URI endpoints. It'll handle a specific request. Okay? So that's basically MVC. That's what MVC is. So it allows us to separate these concerns into three separate parts, allowing it to be more modular. And you know, whenever whenever you're programming, if you can make something modular, you instantly make it more scalable. And so that was the main concern when building a design pattern like MVC. It allows us to build a more scalable application, right? So more complexity, I have more separation of concerns. Okay. So what do we have here, right? What do we have here? This is a representation of the user story, right? This shows how the story plays out of our application. Okay. And so we have our client. Now, our client is a user. Now, it doesn't really need to be a user. A client doesn't really need to be a user, but in this case, it is a user. Okay. So our user is going to go onto our page, right? And whenever a user goes onto our page, they're essentially requesting our page. And that request is being handled by a controller. So they are requesting our page. We send them a view, we send them that HTML page, and they see our page, right? Now on our page, we may have few images, few buttons, and they can have a decision, right? They can have a decision to log in or sign up or not do either, right? But let's say they would want to sign up, right? Let's say they want to register with us, right? So they're gonna click sign up, and so we're gonna show them the sign up page or the view, the sign up view. They're gonna put in their information through a form, and then they're gonna click submit. When they click submit, it is going to be sent through a post request, right? That data is being sent through a post request, which sends that data to the controller. Now, before we get that data to the controller, it will be encrypted. Okay, it always needs to be encrypted, right? But we can talk about the encryption on another video. But here, I just want a high level view of how it works. So they're going to get our data. We're going to then handle that data in this area. Now, it also sends to the login page. But before we go to the login page, we are going to go down here, go down this path, and we are going to store. This is where we store the data, right? Now, what is the data being represented as? The data is being represented as an object, right? And so that is a model, right? So our object is a model. Now, a model is essentially a representation of a record in the database, right? A model represents the real world, an object of the real world, and it also represents a record, or it represents the table in our database. So these two things need to be tightly close to or parallel to each other for this to work, for MVC to work. Okay. So using this object, we are then able to use a framework, right? Or use a library that then takes that object and handles the SQL for us. Now this library is called JPA, or Hibernate, which is a persistence. It allows us to persist our objects, or allows us to keep the data persisting, right? So we use that library to then store via SQL, store that data into our database, right? And so that allows us not to even touch SQL. We don't even need to touch SQL. And so we store that into our database. And then once we do that, then we have sign up successful. We go to the login page. Once we go to the login page, right, the user is then going to log in. They're going to click submit. And now we're going to go to another controller, our login controller. And then it's going to take that data and say, hey, does this person exist? It's going to go into the database. It's going to take that information. If it exists, it is going to compare in this area. It's going to compare the user's input and whatever input is in the database. Okay? That's your logic, right? Once it compares and it verifies that, hey, it does exist, it is the same, the password is the same as the existing password in the database, it is going to authenticate. It authenticated that it is a user. Once it authenticates, now we can authorize. And the difference here, the key difference is I'm verifying that the user exists. So existence is true in authenticate, and in authorize, now that existence is true, now we can offer privileges, right? We can give the user the privilege to see our profile page, right? So that's the difference between authorize and authenticate, right? So with authorize, we're going to give the user the privilege. Since we authenticated, this user exists, we're going to give the privilege to our page, right? And so this could be an admin page, it can be a user page. You can see products on here, you can see various different data on the user, about the user. And so that's our story of just the login. There could be other different flows, but for here, this is a good example of what MVC is. And so now this right here, in this area, this is being handled by Spring. So a lot of this storing into the database is being handled by Spring. We just use a method with JPA, and it even creates the tables. So all of this is being handled by Spring. We just need to explicitly tell Spring to do this. And so now, how do we initialize a Spring project, right? Now that we know this, right? So we're going to go to Google. I'm going to go to old Googly. We're going to go to Spring Initializer, and it's going to be Initializer with a ZR. right? We're going to click Spring Initializer. And now what do we have here? We have, we can choose what type of project we would like to initialize, right? So we want to choose a Maven project for our dependency management. We want to make sure it's Java because we're using Java. For our version, we're going to choose 3.0.6. And then here we are going to say dev example. Let's say example for Spring. And so putting these two fields, we don't need to put anything in these two fields because they'll just auto-populate. And so here in packaging, we're going to choose a WAR file, which is a web archive file, rather than a jar file, which is a Java archive file. And we can talk about that at a later date or another video. For the version of Java, we're going to choose 17. Okay. For our dependencies now, we are going to choose DevTools. This is just your dev tools, your normal dev tools. Next one, we're going to choose Spring Web to build RESTful applications with Spring MVC. We're going to choose Spring Web. And then we're also going to choose Timeleaf. And then we're going to choose MySQL driver. And then we're going to choose JPA. And forgot the main part. We're going to choose security. Choose security, right? So this is our main thing that we want. We want our Spring security. Let's see, is there any more? Yep, that's about it. So these are our dependencies. Now we're going to click generate. And so now we want to choose which folder we want to download it in. And we are going to choose, I'm going to choose my idea projects. It could be any project or any folder. And so that's going to download a zip file. We're going to find that in folder. We call it Spring Example. Oh, it's already taken. My apologies. And then we're going to drag and drop it into our IDE. And so now we can see our project. We can see our project directories and files. So here we're going to see our POM XML. And this, our POM XML basically shows all of the dependencies that we're using, right? So we can see all of the dependencies that we downloaded. So we can see Spring Boot JPA, we can see security, Timeleaf, web, security for Timeleaf, and we can see DevTools and MySQL, Tomcat for our server. So that'll start up our server. MySQL is essentially a driver. You know, if you're using any other databases, you know, like MariaDB, you would need that connector or you would need that driver. So this is for a MySQL database. In this area, this is a starter test. This is for testing. And this is for security testing. Okay. So there you have it.